Although, shit. Look at that lady. Poor bastard.
What a
What a dream case for a lawyer.
well, what a metaphor. All this automation stuff.
Yeah, it starts turning on you. The first like whisper the public gets of it is just a kid getting his finger broken in the chest. Next thing you know, you're just getting fucked by a robot dog. Mm-hmm. Your daughter's getting chased down after a frat party.
And it's not because there's this fantasy that we're going to create life, that we have what it takes to be gods and create life. That little fantasy is more where it's like a doomsday scenario where it's like Skynet and the machine becomes sentient and it decides to kill us. That's like a more there's like
too romantic, you mean?
It's romantic, and it's we're really stretching it and really full of ourselves that we think we can create something that thinks on that level. I'm not hyped on AI.
You're not hyped on AI. I think it's just like a way to like it's like creating a in my head at this point for people to bank on it and think about like they're gonna lose your job. Like, okay, no problem. I got you. Okay, you think eventually it will. Yes, it will take 100 years, but there's going to be bigger fish to fry there. Have you seen the fucking rollout of self-checkout? It's taken 30 years. It's taken 30 years, and there's still someone there. Like, and it ain't going anywhere anytime soon.
I don't use self-checkout.
Oh, never. I love talking to the lady.
Because if you try to scan your fucking chapstick, you're there, and it treats you like a thief.
Yeah.
Please put the thing in the, and you. Dude, that's the perfect point. You think you're gonna create software that pilots a spaceship, a space shuttle, past the speed of light to planet Zubon?
Yeah.
You think that's what's gonna happen? You think you're gonna create software that's so intelligent it manages the day-to-day operations of every Fortune 500 company. Every major city in the world is under the purview of this master computer software. You can't even make fucking self-checkout.
Strong risk management was what got the company to this level, and he didn't slip up in this sector. And that brings us into the 2008 financial crisis. 2008 was a nightmare for bankers and financial professionals around the world. We saw massive institutions like Lehman Brothers completely collapse. Luckily, the Federal Reserve came to the rescue and bailed out many of these irresponsible financial institutions. This decision to bail out Wall Street has been one of the most controversial decisions of all time within the financial industry, and it's one of the main reasons that many people despise these large financial institutions. They can basically do whatever they want and still get away with it. However, this was not the case with BlackRock. BlackRock was well positioned for a disaster just like this, and they were barely affected by the recession. In fact, the financial crisis was a major win for BlackRock. You see, the financial crisis drew massive attention towards proper risk management within the financial sector. Clearly, the big banks like Chase, Wells Fargo, and Citigroup didn't have good risk management. It seemed like the only bank that knew what they were doing with risk was BlackRock. So, all the banks and even the Federal Reserve and the US Treasury flocked over to BlackRock, and more specifically, Aladdin. And keep in mind, Aladdin is not a Netflix subscription that you get for $10 a month. A lot of you guys were surprised by my Michael Bloomberg video, where I discussed how Bloomberg charges $2,000 per month for the Bloomberg terminal. But Aladdin is on a whole nother level. Take JP Morgan for instance. BlackRock charged JP Morgan $1.5 million just to set up Aladdin with their bank. And the latest figure suggests that JP Morgan was paying BlackRock $5.3 million per year for Aladdin. That's the same as $14,500 per day. I don't think you'd be surprised to hear that BlackRock made a killing during the financial crisis. Aside from making a killing, BlackRock had a unique opportunity to buy out struggling financial corporations for unbelievably cheap prices. One of their most notable purchases during this time was the Global Investors Unit from Barclays for $13.5 billion. This gave BlackRock ownership of the iShares brand, which you may know as being one of the largest ETF brands in the world. And this acquisition allowed BlackRock to emerge as the largest asset manager in the world in 2009. Really, quite an ironic rise. But given that they were the only major player prioritizing risk management, I'd say it's well deserved. Throughout the 2010s, not much really happened with BlackRock. There weren't any interesting stories or close calls. BlackRock has just been decimating with both Aladdin and their various funds. In 2020, when the pandemic rolled around, the Federal Reserve instantly turned to BlackRock once again, as they've become the most trusted risk manager in the world.
If I told you there is a robot that controls more wealth than any country on earth, a robot so powerful that in the last 10 years, it has quietly created the biggest company in the world. This is the story of a robot called Aladdin. It's Wall Street's best kept secret, and it's gobbling up every asset class across every industry. Aladdin now controls $21 trillion of our global economy. To put that in perspective, that's more than the $20 trillion GDP of the US or the $15 trillion GDP of the entire European Union. The New Statesman wrote, the total physical cash of all 7 billion people and every company, bank vault, wallet, and piggy bank in the world is around $5 trillion. Aladdin has grown into a system responsible for more than 4 times the value of all the money in the world. This one robot directs the actions of the US Federal Reserve, almost every major bank and investment fund on Wall Street, and over 17,000 traders. It controls half of all ETFs, 17% of the bond market, 10% of the global stock market, and carries out 250,000 trades every day and billions of forecasts every week. Year after year, it hoovers up trillions of data points on every market, every company, every asset, and now even each of us, what we buy, sell, and say, so that it knows what to buy and what to sell far better than any human being. Every major bank, company, and investment fund has come to rely on Aladdin and its all-powerful AI and algorithms to beat the market. And if they didn't, they've collapsed and failed in Aladdin's wake. And you know what the craziest part of this story is? This robot is just getting started. So where did Aladdin come from and how did it get so powerful? Aladdin is the brainchild of Larry Fink, the founder of BlackRock, and its total dominance has made his company the biggest shadow bank in the world and the most powerful company on earth. The story you're about to hear is equally unbelievable and terrifying. In fact, you would think it was science fiction if it wasn't very real and happening today. This story starts in the 1980s when Larry Fink was making millions pioneering mortgage-backed securities at Wall Street Bank First Boston. That's right, the same mortgage-backed securities that caused the 2008 global financial crisis 20 years later. But back in the 80s, he was in an epic Wall Street rivalry with Louis Ranieri at Salomon Brothers, made famous as the big swinging dick in Michael Lewis's book Liar's Poker. Back then, Larry was making millions for the bank and was on track to be First Boston's CEO. And then in 1986, an error in the back office computer models led to Larry making the wrong trades and he lost the company $100 million. The result was Larry leaving the bank as a failure with the stupid computer to blame. With that experience, Larry had just one ambition: to build a super smart robot that could pick out risk and opportunity in the market and do it better than any computer or human could do. In 1988, he launched a new startup, BlackRock, with a tiny coding team to give birth to this robot. Its name, Aladdin, which stands for Asset, Liability, and Debt Derivative Investment Network. In its first 10 years, Aladdin was fed information about every asset, price movement, and risk variable in the global bond market, Larry's specialty. And in 1999, when Aladdin turned 11, Aladdin was getting so intelligent at picking losers and winners that Larry began selling access to its data to other Wall Street firms. That same year, he took BlackRock public on the New York Stock Exchange. Straight after the IPO, the dot-com bust burst, pushing a wall of money from the stock market to bonds, which Aladdin had become the undisputed world champion in. Within years, BlackRock had become a $1 trillion company, and as money started shifting back to shares, what did Larry do? He bought the asset management arm of Merrill Lynch, which was focused to shares. So the gift for Aladdin's 18th birthday, all the data points for the entire stock market, and suddenly Aladdin had a new playground, analyzing every stock trade and risk factor for every company on the stock market. As a result, today BlackRock, together with his 2 closest rivals, Vanguard and State Street, both of which also rely on Aladdin's mountain of knowledge, have become the biggest shareholders of over 40% of all public listed companies in America. 2008, the global financial crisis hits, and before Aladdin turns 21 years old, is called on by every Wall Street bank and Timothy Geithner, the head of the Federal Reserve and the US Treasury. As soon as Lehman Brothers collapsed and the Wall Street meltdown began, the US government came calling to save the next collapsing bank, Bear Stearns. It was Aladdin who decided which assets to keep and which to leave in the $30 billion rescue package. And few people know it was a robot that saved America from disaster. With that first success, the Fed, US government, and now even European and Japanese central banks began relying on Aladdin to make the calls on where the $2.5 trillion of new money they printed should go. The majority of it, bonds and funding to prop up the mortgage companies and banks. But wait, aren't these exactly the assets that Aladdin and BlackRock already were invested in? Exactly. But growing protests of conflict of interest were drowned out by the noise of the printing presses printing more money, as the assets controlled by Aladdin rapidly grew to $11 trillion by 2013. In the last decade, Aladdin has gone from the leader to the dominator of all financial markets. With BlackRock's Barclays acquisition, it got iShares, Barclays Exchange Traded Funds Units, or ETFs. And with that, Aladdin moved from dominator of bonds and equities to dominator of ETFs, just as all the biggest investors shifted from mutual funds to ETFs. And that's when, in 2017, everything changed. On Aladdin's 29th birthday, Larry launched a top-secret project at BlackRock, codenamed Monarch. It led to the firing of his fund managers and replacing their funds with Aladdin's funds. The robot was now eliminating humans from the equation altogether. And as a result, today over 70% of all trades on US stock markets are decided by robots, with Aladdin leading the way. These trades are completed from beginning to end without a human involved, in high-frequency trading far faster than a human can execute. Now, if this was just a story about a robot taking over the job of Wall Street traders, you might not be so concerned, unless you're one of those traders. But in the last 3 years, as Aladdin hit $20 trillion in assets, incredibly, it has begun to consume and control at an even faster rate. First, in 2020, as Aladdin turned 32 years old, the US government and Federal Reserve again came calling as the pandemic hit. Aladdin was again the one to guide the nation in what was now $4 trillion of newly printed money. Where did the money go this time? Inexplicably, for the first time, the Fed began buying ETFs in 2020. Well, that's a little strange. And again, the cries of conflict of interest were drowned out by the money printing. And then Aladdin revealed its endgame. Recently, BlackRock acquired eFront, which collects data on the things that you and I own, including private equity and real estate. And since then, Aladdin has consumed eFront's data on the entire global real estate market. And yep, you guess what happened next. Over the last 2 years, BlackRock and other funds using Aladdin's data have begun buying up single-family homes, where they can afford to outbid the rest of us as they have unlimited financing at hyper-low interest rates. The result is home prices rising by 20% over the last 2 years and pushing now even big players like Zillow out of the market. And here we see Aladdin's endgame, to be the one hyper-intelligent AI robot that not just controls Wall Street assets, but all assets, public and private. Now, I'm not into conspiracy theories, but even a skeptic with eyes wide open can see the signs. We're already at a point where no one can compete without Aladdin. As CEOs and asset managers like Anthony Malloy are now saying, Aladdin is like oxygen. Without it, we wouldn't be able to function. And what about government regulation? Well, Joe Biden has appointed BlackRock executive Brian Deese as head of the National Economic Council, which basically means the oversight of Aladdin and BlackRock is now the responsibility of BlackRock. And Biden has also appointed BlackRock Chief of Staff, Wally Adeyemo, to be Assistant Secretary of the Treasury, which means BlackRock is now the Treasury as well as the Treasury Advisor. And this story is far from over. The genie is out of the bottle. And Aladdin has already reached a tipping point where one robot controls more wealth than any person or country. But as Aladdin's AI capabilities continue to grow, and with its rate of control rising by another $1 trillion to $2 trillion in new assets every year, it looks inevitable that Wall Street's secret weapon could end up owning everything, and we end up owning nothing. So what do you think? Are you indifferent?
I think the computer internet revolution was the one big exception, and it is striking how uncharismatic that has become over the last 6 or 7 years. Where even in San Francisco or Silicon Valley, the felt sense is that most people are somehow being left behind. That it's not this utopian, inclusive future at all.
Again, I'm quoting you. This is something you mentioned just the other day. There's a sense that science and tech are a trap that humanity is setting for itself.
Well, there's always a question, why the slowdown has happened, and I'm always hesitant to answer the why question, because these things are so overdetermined, and it can be things from sclerosis and overregulation in government to ways that education institutions have deranged. It's possible that in certain areas it's just become harder to discover new things, where even if we build new particle colliders in physics, how many new particles are we finding? And so there's sort of a whole range of components to it. But if I had to anchor on a single narrative, the one that I've come to believe very strongly is that there's something about science and technology that is very dangerous, that feels somewhat like a trap, where so many of these technologies have sort of a very dark, violent, even apocalyptic dimension. The paradigmatic example are probably nuclear weapons, where progress didn't stop immediately after 1945, but it was some kind of a delayed quarter-century reaction where, say, in 1970, people woke up one day and realized, we can blow the whole world up, 20 times over.
And I was, in all honesty, freaking out, saying, I can't believe this. Where's the morality? Where are the ethics? Why do people think it is okay to create machines that on their own can target and kill? And I started pushing that we needed to bring together people we'd worked with on other campaigns and launch a campaign to stop killer robots. So we launched the campaign in London with a peaceful robot. His name is David Reckham.
Ban killer robots. Ban killer robots.
I want to stress the campaign does not oppose robotics. It does not oppose artificial intelligence. It opposes putting all that together in machinery that can kill you by itself.
She's talking about autonomous robots, which can make decisions on their own without humans in the loop. Those robots don't exist yet. But in her research, Jody has encountered bipedal robots like the ones we saw at Virginia Tech. And she's worried DARPA's grand plan is much more sinister than semi-autonomous search and rescue.
When I saw Atlas, the only thing I could think of was, when are they going to put, machine guns or whatever they will ultimately decide to put on it?
The line we kept getting is that these are service-oriented robots. They're here to help humans.
And then they will be helping humans kill. When they tell you that they will not be weaponizing them, I want to know what they're smoking. There is nothing that the U.S. develops in the military sphere that it does not want to weaponize.
But what about something like a bomb-diffusing robot? The U.S. military has been deploying explosive ordnance disposal robots by the thousands since the beginning of the Iraq War. They're the little brothers to Atlas and Escher, and they've saved the lives of countless soldiers and civilians. We get a crash course in bomb bots at Fort A.P. Hill, a U.S. Army training base in Southwest Virginia.
So in the explosive ordnance disposal field, we're early adopters and saw the value in robotic platforms early. In the 1980s, we adopted our first set of robots. So this is a class of the advanced NCO course. So these are all staff sergeants here for training, and part of their training is to use robots. So this is a variety of tasks. How do you get a robot up and down stairs? How do you get it in and around corners? And then how do you use the gripper to pick up, change, pull off, or somehow manipulate the item that you're trying to use?
But not using Xbox controllers, right?
Absolutely, yes. I don't claim credit for it, but it was one of those conversations that we had one time with field reps, and we said, hey, we already have a whole class of young men and women that are certified to use this. So wouldn't it be great if we could have a controller that did that? And so that is the controller that comes with that robot, because the soldiers are already well versed in using them.
So apparently there's a...
Now at 7, police robots with the potential for deadly force. The SFPD policy just considered by San Francisco supervisors, allowing robots to kill suspects in certain critical situations.
There's been a lot of talk about RoboCop, or, which I think sets, a whole lot of minds going to a whole lot of different places.
This is KTVU Fox 2 News at 7 on KTVU Plus.
And that controversial plan just passed about an hour ago in an 8-3 vote. Welcome, everyone, to the 7 here on KTVU Plus. I'm Alex Savage.
And I'm Greg Lee. Those police robots will be allowed to use potentially deadly force. The plan's drawn criticism from civil liberties advocates. KTVU crime reporter Henry Lee reports.
San Francisco police asking for approval by the Board of Supervisors to use robots like this one as a potential deadly force option. That means military-grade machines operated by trained officers could potentially kill suspects during critical incidents.
There's been a lot of talk about RoboCop, or, which I think sets, a whole lot of minds going to a whole lot of different places, but this is not that.
San Francisco Supervisor Rafael Mandelman supports using robots for specific life-threatening cases.
In fact, I think it would be irresponsible not to make some kind of plan to use that technology in that horrific eventuality.
It's really just opening a window that eventually somebody's going to want to crawl through.
Matthew Goriglia, a policy analyst with the Electronic Frontier Foundation, says it doesn't make sense to give robots the ability to kill.
We are going to lessen the burden of using deadly force from having to pull a gun and pull the trigger to a button on a remote control.
SFPD already has 17 robots, and none of them have live ammunition. But the department is considering using a robot with explosives attached as a way to get into a building with violent, armed suspects barricaded inside. In a statement, SFPD said in part, while an explosive charge may be considered an intermediate force option, it could potentially cause injury or be lethal. Robots equipped in this manner would only be used in extreme circumstances to save or prevent further loss of innocent lives. The discussion in San Francisco comes just a month after the Oakland Police Commission decided against a policy that would have allowed OPD to use robots with shotguns. In Dallas, a robot armed with explosives was used by police to kill a man suspected of shooting and killing 5 police officers in 2016.
Transport the robot to the scene.
Supervisor Hillary Ronan spoke out against authorizing lethal force for robots, saying she thinks this is an incredibly dangerous route to go. In San Francisco, Henry Lee, KTVU News.
March 16th, 2018. The U.S. government's Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, commonly known as DARPA, announces a bold initiative to develop what they call next-generation non-surgical neurotechnology. It is designed to allow the human brain to directly interface with machines.
We know that DARPA is exploring human-machine interfaces that include direct connections between the brain and outside systems. That's been from the beginning of DARPA's information technology mission, and it continues to this day. DARPA has created some of the most influential technologies of all time, things that we use and take for granted every day, including the project that became the internet. They've created self-driving cars, stealth technology, GPS that fits in your pocket. That's DARPA's specialty, to imagine the future and create it.
A new technology that is actually very much on the verge of being a reality that is being fielded is we could have a sensor maybe on the surface of our head, or maybe implanted somewhere in our body, in our brain, or something that allows us to interact directly with our communications gear, our processing gear, our weapon systems, and so on. But now imagine we take that technology and we can control robots at a distance with it. Even fly drones. You put this sensor on and you think the right way, and you can increase the speed of the fan by thinking and controlling that thought with direct-to-mind or mind-machine interfacing. With that type of capability, you could control all sorts of buttons and mechanisms in equipment.
Mind-machine interfaces will have many applications in both civilian and military life. But there are those who believe that this same technology could also be used by DARPA as a new form of mind control. Like their counterparts at the CIA, DARPA-funded researchers have spent decades investigating how the human mind can be altered. In 1965, DARPA launched Project Pandora, which studied the possibility of using microwave radiation to control human behavior. The project reportedly ended in 1969, but DARPA's investigation of how machines can affect and possibly control the brain continues to this day.
There are explicit programs of DARPA to read and write to human brains, whether it's through direct implants within the brain or wearing some kind of cap. So these things are being worked on, and we know that.
So what's the next step? Maybe the next step is we can send instructions and information to an actual person. from a distance with this kind of technology to let another person control their actions. But that could be something that could be malicious.
If there's some way to do it from a distance, a much greater distance than something that you can wear on your scalp,